News Bureau. And Jamie has been following this story, getting ready to help be part of this big announcement. Jamie, the president getting ready here in about 15 minutes to announce something that a lot of Americans have been looking forward to when it comes to student loans. Give us some of the details of what we can expect with his announcement today.
Yeah, certainly. We actually got some details ahead of time so that we can really break down some of these numbers for you. The president is set to speak here any minute now. In the meantime, I'm going to be heading down there right after this report because they said there's multiple officials that will be joining them. They're not saying who those officials are just yet, but I can tell you that earlier today they've been releasing a lot of background information on what this president plans to say today and what his plan is for the next round of student loan forgiveness. So I want to break down just how important this is for a lot of families. Student loan forgiveness was supposed to run out as of August 31st. So at the end of this month, people were going to be kind of stuck if they didn't hear what was going to happen, and they were going to be forced to start repaying on some of these loans that they borrowed on. But today, the president actually is expected to announce what would be the largest student loan forgiveness extension to date. If you remember, this started when the pandemic really began at the height of it, and now it continues on until December 31st. So those who have been relying on this student loan forgiveness can now rely on it further up until January 2023, and that's when these payments will begin again.
So we do know that there could possibly be some things that you have to go, certain numbers or such that you have to qualify for this. Do you have any of those details yet?
Yeah, actually we do. I want to show you here. This is the fact sheet that the White House released to us this morning, and you know, it actually has a lot of pages to it, so there's a lot to digest here, and I have put this up on all Gray TV websites if you want to read through it. But the crux of this comes down to this. For people who make less than $125,000, if you took out a Pell Grant to go to college, you could be eligible to up to $20,000 in student loan forgiveness. If you didn't take out a Pell Grant, you could be eligible for up to $10,000 in student loan forgiveness. And there's one part of the plan that is new, and that it adds a new proposal that allows people with undergraduate loans to cap repayment at 5% of their monthly income. So if you qualify for any of that, you could see a lot of relief. And like I said, it extends that deadline to December 31st, which means that you won't have to start repaying on these loans until January of 2023.
And we do have some of these images available that you referenced in that fact sheet, especially cost of attending college has skyrocketed. It continues to skyrocket. Federal support hasn't kept up pace over the past, since the 80s or so. It just kind of has stayed on a steady line while the cost continues to go up. What is this going to mean for Americans who are struggling to pay their bills while also struggling to kind of pay those student loans off?
Well, President Biden says that the cost of college should really be an avenue to putting people in the middle class, but he says instead it's turned into this lifelong burden for people that has kept them out of the middle class. And he says that this new plan will help about 20 million people. He says 90% of those that are helped by this will be making less than $75,000. He says no one in the top 5% of incomes will see this relief. So he's really stressing that this is meant to help those folks that are buried under debt at this point. And he also says that this plan will help racial equality because they said that they specifically gave that $20,000 in student loan forgiveness for people who earn an annual income less than $125,000 because he says Black Americans are people who take out most Pell Grants. So he says that can really help that community as well and make sure that community can handle the cost of college because so many people borrow just to be able to afford to get their higher education.
Well, and for some people, I think that even the idea of the student loans or not being able to afford college is a detriment, and they may choose not to go to college. So maybe something like this could help someone in the future decide that college is a step for them.
Certainly, and the Department of Education is putting out a lot of information right now on exactly how to access, this forgiveness and what you have to do and the steps you need to take. They tell me that they're going to be releasing even more information in the next coming weeks, so you have more details on this new plan, because a lot of the information that's out there right now pertains to the forgiveness that's happening up until August 31st. Obviously, the new plan will now go into effect. And the Department of Education wants everyone to know, and they want this as a warning to everyone. They say this will be likely the final extension that we see on student loan forgiveness. As I said, this really was a program that started during the height of the pandemic. Obviously, a lot of schools are returning to normal now, letting kids back in the classroom, not making people wear masks anymore. And as schools get back to normal, the federal government is trying to get back to normal as well. And so the Department of Education is warning everyone this will probably be the last extension that we see on this. So they're telling everyone, be prepared January 2023 to start repaying these loans. But meanwhile, they're going to be releasing more information on just how you can access this aid on their website. And on all Gray TV websites, I have also included a lot of information for those of you out there who really are looking for this help or maybe interested in going in college and want to give it a try before this student loan forgiveness runs out.
All right. Thank you so much, Jamie Bittner, for all those details from our Washington News Bureau. Of course, Biden's set to give this announcement just shortly, so we will let you get off as well so that you can tune in to that. We appreciate all of your great information.
Certainly, I really appreciate it, and I would tell everyone to stay in tune with this story today, because as much as this is receiving a lot of praise, it's also receiving a lot of criticism for people who say not only that it doesn't go far enough, but also people who question extending this assistance in the first place. So we'll be covering all of that this afternoon after the president's announcement.
Okay, thank you so much. Once again, Jamie Bittner out of the Washington News Bureau. And we will look forward to Biden's announcement shortly. Right now, sending it back to Victoria.
Thank you so much for that interview and a lot of really great insight from our Gray DC Bureau. Well, our Gray DC Bureau aren't the only ones covering this story. Our Gray TV stations from across the country are finding out what their local communities are thinking about this student loan forgiveness plan. And one community is our station in Springfield, Massachusetts. Let me actually show you their website briefly so you can see. And they recently did a story about college students and other officials reacting to the possible decision on student loan forgiveness. Let's go ahead and play a piece of this video, and then we have a few other communities we can jump to while we're waiting on the president's announcement. Let's go ahead and take a listen in.
Week before monthly loan payments are set to resume at the end of the month.
And then as many people talking, wondering if he'll cancel more than $10,000 per borrower, in addition to extending the pause that's been in place now since early on in the pandemic. Western Mass News reporter Kristen Burnell joining us live with the story after getting answers. Kristen.
Chris and Mary, I took questions to the director of financial aid at American International College to see what the chances are that some students will receive loan forgiveness. As you can imagine, students I spoke with tell me they are all for it.
I think that's fantastic. I think, especially with, everything post-COVID, a lot of families struggling. I think that'd be a huge help to everybody in the community.
Students at American International College tell Western Mass News they strongly support the possibility of President Joe Biden canceling more than $10,000 per borrower in federal student loans.
It'd be a great benefit for everybody. I think it would be stellar. Everybody would be so happy for it.
Student loan forgiveness is a topic that President Biden fought hard for during his presidential campaign. So what is the possibility that President Biden acts on this promise? Western Mass News is getting answers from the Director of Financial Aid at American International College.
I think the likelihood is certainly increasing with some of the news that's come out in the past couple days. It looks like he's going to be doing $10,000 for anybody that makes less than $125,000 a year.
O'Connor tells us that President Biden has until August 31st to decide, which is when student repayments are scheduled to resume after being paused for over 2 years as part of a pandemic-era relief policy.
It looks like it's going to be sometime this week. He's got to make an announcement before August 31st, before the payment pause ends and stuff. So we're going to know something in the next, 8 days.
And O'Connor adds that he believes this would be a step in the right direction.
I think it could have a positive impact on people in terms of pursuing graduate education. I think, again, the details are going to really tell us a lot about what the impact will be. It's a step that a lot of student loan borrowers are going to be happy to see come through.
As for whether this loan forgiveness would apply to current college students or just graduates, we'll have to wait until the president's plan is announced, which could come as early as tomorrow. Live in studio, Kristen Burnell, Western Mass News.
All right, the very latest there from our station in Western Massachusetts. We have several other stations also covering this story, including KCRG, where some Iowans are sharing that they have mixed feelings about student debt forgiveness. So let's go ahead and share their perspective for this national story for you now. And then we'll jump into some of the details again in case you are just now joining us. Let's get you out to KCRG, which is based in Iowa.
The country is expecting an announcement from the White House tomorrow about student loan forgiveness. Now, for many graduates, it could forgive up to $10,000 in federal student loans.
KCRG TV9's Molly Swain spoke to Eastern Iowans to learn what they thought about the idea. Molly?
Hey guys, the president has faced pressure from fellow Democrats to help borrowers, while others have questioned the fairness of student loan forgiveness. I stopped 3 random people today in Iowa City, all of whom turned out to have student debt that's now paid off, and all of whom have complicated feelings about canceling student debt.
I have mixed feelings about student loan forgiveness in general because I worked hard to pay off my student loans, and so it's not a benefit that I would receive.
Anna Spooner now runs her own business after getting a degree in finance from the University of Iowa, a degree that took her about 15 years to pay off.
I do remember it was quite an intimidating amount.
I also spoke to Mark Butland, who had about $60,000 in debt from his PhD alone, which just so happened to be in educational administration.
I think it's a good idea to give students a break. I think the problem's much bigger than that.
The country's federal student debt now tops $1.6 trillion, and more than 43 million Americans have federal student debt.
I think as a society, we're struggling to find the value in higher education.
As for the plan that is expected to be announced Wednesday, up to $10,000 in relief for people making less than $125,000 a year, he's sure that is a big relief for some individuals.
I was a professor for 30 years before I retired, and I saw a lot of students carrying a lot of stress around this issue.
But when it comes to forgiving debt that is already accrued for an expensive degree,
that's exactly the word I would use as a Band-Aid. We need a better solution than that.
Cole Peters graduated in spring 2021 with $16,000 in student debt, but he paid it all off thanks to working all the way through college as a server.
I just did just kind of a bulk and, send off and paid it all off in one go.
For Peters, if student debt is forgiven for others,
whatever happens, happens, but I'm not going to be jealous of it.
Even for Spooner, the specifics of the expected plan sound like a compromise.
It sounds like something that can give you a break without kind of giving you a free pass.
Today, the Republican National Committee said the expected announcement was a, quote, handout to the rich. They claimed it would burden lower-income taxpayers and those who have already paid off their loans with covering the cost of higher education for others. In the studio, Molly Swain, KCRG TV9 News.
All right, that was the very latest from our station in Iowa. If you're just now joining us, we are waiting on President Biden to make a major, long-awaited announcement regarding student loans. Let's get into some of the details that we know as of right now, and we can break it down piece by piece as we continue to follow reaction from across the country as we're waiting for President Biden. So let's go ahead and jump right into this. All right, big changes are coming for millions of Americans with student loans Wednesday. Today, the White House announced it's extending the pause in student announced no payments will be required and supposedly protect more income from loan payments. All right, we have a few more details that we can share with you, but first, I wanted to take you out to our station in Madison, Wisconsin. They have reaction from local people in their community about how they feel about student loan forgiveness. So I wanted to go ahead and share their perspective for you now.
About 8,000 or 10,000 left of undergrad.
Former University of Wisconsin-Madison student Anna has
All right, so obviously here we're working on getting some audio fixed for this story. So I'll go ahead and come up on here and get you updated on kind of what WMTV is going to be talking about. Of course, we are in continuous coverage of President Biden expected to make a major announcement regarding student loan debt cancellation for millions of people. And a little bit of information related to that, of course, is that you have to make less than $125,000 per year. If you were on Pell Grants, you can have up to $20,000 forgiven. And if you did not receive Pell Grants, you can receive or have up to $10,000 of student loan debt forgiven here. And that was made, that announcement was made earlier today. We are awaiting President Biden to give us more information related to this big move, as it's been a big part of his campaign and his administration since taking office. Victoria?
Thank you so much for that, Clay. Unfortunately, we did have some technical difficulties, as happens sometimes when you're live streaming, but we have that resolved now, and we did want to share with you this story out of our Madison, Wisconsin station. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about some of the nitty-gritty details with our very own Ryan Piers as we wait for President Biden to go ahead and take to the podium so we can hear those details from the president himself. Let's get you out to Madison, Wisconsin, and their reaction to this news.
According to a number of sources familiar with the matter.
And it would include an update on the student loan moratorium set to expire August 31st and potential loan cancellations.
Now, before Colton Molesky headed out to that breaking news story you just saw, he had the time to speak with area colleges to get more on the impact this could have on borrowers.
I have about 8,000 or 10,000 left of undergrad.
Former University of Wisconsin-Madison student Anna Nicolay has roughly $20,000 in student debt she has not had to address since the student moratorium paused payments back in 2020.
After I realized it was going to keep extending, I started putting that money into a separate account and kept putting it there instead.
It is expected President Joe Biden will continue to extend the moratorium on Wednesday past the August 31st deadline. UW-Madison School of Business lecturer Moses Altsek says the move is a temporary fix for a much bigger problem.
And there are some people for whom this will be very beneficial, but what it really is a one-off in terms of the relief. It doesn't do anything to address the long-term rising cost of higher education.
According to Forbes, that cost has ballooned to the tune of 180% increase in the past 40 years. Altsek says even a potential $10,000 cancellation of debt will have varied impacts, all of it short-sighted.
This kind of relief is temporary, one-time relief that doesn't do anything in the long run.
Nicolay says while the moratorium pause is nice, the limbo of not knowing what is on the other side is strenuous when trying to plan for the future.
You're just kind of waiting for that to start up again. Like, you never know exactly when it's going to go, so you have to have some money saved or like ready to go again. Just a little like in the back of your head of the anxiety piece.
Colton Molesky reporting. Our team coverage on student loans continues with NBC 15's Elizabeth Wattis. Now, Elizabeth, for the past 2 years, when an extension has been set to expire, it's been extended again instead.
Yeah, Maria, the president is expected to announce that $10,000 in forgiveness tomorrow. But let's look back at how we got here. Back in March of 2020, the U.S. Department of Education announced a pause in student loan payments, and they set interest rates to zero. This was due to the hardships of the pandemic.
pandemic. Since then, there have been 6 extensions, 2 from former President Donald Trump and 4 from President Joe Biden. The last extension was announced back in April of 2022 that the freeze would expire at the end of August. So that brings us to tomorrow, when President Biden is expected to clarify what will happen next for students. We will be watching. Live in the studio, Elizabeth Wattis, NBC 15 News.
All right, we appreciate our station in Madison, Wisconsin for that report. I'm going to share with you a few tweets from the president and the White House as we're waiting for him to take the podium to announce this long-awaited student loan forgiveness program. And then we're going to go out to Studio B, where Ryan Pierce is standing by with some information about this new plan. First, let's go to President Biden's tweet. He tweeted out that he will be delivering remarks on my administration student loan debt relief plan at 2:15 p.m. Eastern Time. It is about 2:27 Eastern Time, so we are still waiting on those remarks. And then he tweeted out a link saying, in the meantime, go to the link that has more information. They do have a full fact sheet and FAQ sheet that shares some of that information. All right, let's go to this next tweet. All right, he tweeted out saying, in keeping with my campaign promise, my administration is announcing a plan to give working and middle-class families breathing room as they prepare to resume federal student loan payments in January 2023. And then the White House tweeted out this tweet this morning saying, today, President Biden will announce student loan debt relief for borrowers that need it most, building on his promise to grow the economy from the bottom up and middle out. All right, those are the tweets from the White House as well as the president. I do have Ryan Pierce standing by. Let me go ahead and pop up his microphone. Ryan, go ahead and share with us some of the information that you've been able to find about this issue.
Yeah, Victoria, so I'll start with what President Biden was tweeting about there. And this is a fulfillment to an extent of a campaign promise, and that's what the Biden administration is trying to hammer down. This follows really an incredibly active month of August for the Biden administration when they passed what they're calling the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, Republicans say it won't do anything to reduce inflation problems, but this is kind of the cherry on top for the Biden administration, a final piece of, to an extent, legislation. I guess in this case, it's more of an act from the president to eliminate student loans, federal student loans, for anyone making under $125,000 per year. It eliminates about $10,000 of those federal student loans and $20,000 if they're on college or went to college via the Pell Grant. It also freezes student loan payments until the end of the year. And of course, President Biden mentioned that this will be the last student loan freeze that he and then first President Trump did when the pandemic started back in March of 2020. But going back to that original discussion, that original tweet by President Biden, this is something his administration wants to hammer down. It's another promise fulfilled from the Biden administration that they are at least reducing student loans. Now, on the flip side, many Democrats are saying, if you go to social media and just look at some of the more progressive Democrats' response, that this doesn't fully address what the Biden administration was trying to do when he ran for president. In some cases, the Biden administration promised further student loan cancellation than just $10,000. And there is some disappointment among more progressive Democrats that the administration didn't go that far. With that said, this does, to an extent, mirror the Inflation Reduction Act. And of course, the process of getting here is different because President Biden doesn't have to work through Congress like he does with that heavy legislation that was recently passed. But the Biden administration originally wanted the Build Back Better plan to number in the trillions in terms of funding. It got down to about $700 billion. That was the compromise between the administration and more moderate Democrats like Senator Joe Manchin. And this kind of mirrors that. It was originally supposed to be a much higher student loan debt cancellation as campaigned on by the Biden administration, and now they bring it down to about $10,000. Still, many Democrats are saying this is a nice compromise, and the administration is still fulfilling a promise that it made to voters when they said we are going to reduce and potentially eliminate student loans for many people. Now, they're not eliminating them, but if you make under $125,000, it does take away $10,000 in loan debt and about $20,000 if you went to college on a Pell Grant. That, in a nutshell, is both what the Biden administration is promising and the political environment surrounding this big announcement from the president today. It comes as his approval ratings have gone up ever so slightly, and Democrats have a more solid footing when they want to run and try to hold the Senate, potentially, although unlikely, the House in the midterm elections. It is something that Democrats will have to wait and see if they want to run on this. It's something President Biden will tout as a win, and we'll see to what extent it impacts the Democrats' chances of holding on to Congress when the midterms come up in just a couple of months. Victoria, I'll send it back to you now.
All right.
I think we're getting closer to President Biden maybe speaking, but I know you got a lot more coverage from our affiliates across the country.
Yes, thank you so much, Ryan. And I was just saying, wow, because I did find just now a story that I wanted to share with our viewers here from our station, WOWT, based in Omaha, Nebraska, and they have a different perspective. This is a University of Nebraska Omaha professor who is, quote unquote, debunking the myth that student loan forgiveness would boost the economy. So I did want to share all sides with you here today. So let's go ahead and pop this up. Again, this is from our station, WOWT in Omaha, Nebraska, speaking with a professor talking about the impact or lack of impact that student loan forgiveness may have. And we're also waiting on the president, so if we see him step up to the podium, we will jump out of any coverage we're in to share that important announcement with you. Let's take you out to Omaha, Nebraska.
At his alma mater this weekend, many will be listening for and wondering if Biden will forgive student loans.
Our Laura Melendez talked to some students about what they anticipate and what a professor thinks the impact would be.
To cancel or not to cancel? That is the question.
I am considering dealing with some debt reduction. I am not considering $50,000.
For months now, the president has been fiddling over how much student loan debt to forgive. College students are ready, especially when they realize their loans could be in the six figures when they cross the stage.
I don't love it.
It sucks.
On UNO's campus, one freshman finance major believes fewer loans means more financial freedom.
I feel like people are more willing to spend money on things that they actually want rather than things that they actually need to pay for.
And some predictions would have you believe the economy may resemble a big crazed Black Friday sale, with millions of Americans storming retailers and fueling the economy. But this local economics professor doesn't quite see it that way.
So this means every month, so I have additional saving less than $300.
UNO's Dr. Zhigang Fang says even if a few $1,000s of student loans were canceled, it won't move the economy much. It's not like a stimulus, which is a direct payment to someone. Student loan forgiveness is just a tiny fraction of a very large loan that they still owe.
So this is going to add on our national debt.
To clarify, Dr. Fang says he's not opposed to the idea of student debt forgiveness, but technically, because our student debt is the government's debt, it would reduce America's GDP.
This loan was financed by borrowing from the Treasury, or more precisely, the government is going to lose some dividend in the future.
He calls education a risky business and says the best option moving forward would be to address the high cost of college so we don't continue sinking people into financial ruin. Of course, that's wishful thinking.
Knowing that I'm not going to be able to just enjoy my future, I'm going to have to worry about these debts, going to have to worry about these bills that I'm going to have to pay.
At any rate, students say some relief would be better than none. On your side, Lauren Melendez, 6 News.
Right now, the U.S. has about $1.5 trillion of collective student loan debt. It accounts for close to 8% of the national income.
All right, again, we are waiting on President Biden to go ahead and take the podium to give us a little bit more information about the student debt forgiveness program plan that he's announcing. But we do have some details that the administration has unveiled online. Let's go through some of these details. We do know that there will be a $10,000 student loan cancellation as long as you fall within the income requirements, and then a $20,000 cancellation for Pell Grant recipients and borrowers earning less than $125,000 a year. That's individuals will qualify for those stats on the first 2 bullets. All right, let's dig deeper into this plan. And this student debt cancellation plan will also pause extensions for federal student loan payments through the end of 2022. More than 43 million people have student loan debt, so several people can benefit. And let's dig deeper into this again. And an estimated 20 million people will have student loan debt erased through this plan. No one in the top 5% of incomes will see any student debt relief. Those are some of the facts there. And the White House did release some charts that I also want to share with you while we're waiting on the president to speak. Let's go ahead and jump right into this here. All right, so the first one you see is the cost of attending college has skyrocketed again. These are all graphics courtesy of the White House, but they say federal support has not kept pace. They say since 1980, the total cost of both four-year public and four-year private college has nearly tripled. Even after accounting for inflation, federal support has not kept up. They say Pell Grants once covered nearly 80% of the cost of a four-year public college degree for students from working families, but now only cover a third. But that has left many students from low and middle income families with no choice but to borrow if they want to get a degree. According to a Department of Education analysis, the typical undergraduate student with loans now graduates with nearly $25,000 worth of debt. And the red line you see on your screen is a public four-year university cost. And then the other sort of beige looking line is the maximum Pell Grant values. All right, and the skyrocketing cumulative federal student loan debt, $1.6 trillion, and rising for more than 45 million borrowers, is a significant burden on America's middle class. Middle class borrowers struggle with high monthly payments and ballooning balances that make it harder for them to build wealth, like buying homes, putting away money for retirement, and starting small businesses. Let's go ahead and jump into some of these other graphics we have for you here. All right, so again, for the most vulnerable borrowers, the effects of debt are even more crushing. According to the White House, nearly one-third of borrowers have debt, but no degree, according to analysis by the Department of Education of a recent study of undergraduates. Many of these students could not complete their degree because of the cost of attendance was too high. About 16% of borrowers are in default, including nearly a third of senior citizens with student debt, which can result in the government garnishing a borrower's wage or lowering a borrower's credit score. All right, let's talk about the Pell Grant recipients here. So nearly all Pell Grant recipients come from families with incomes of $60,000 or less. The Pell Grant program, according to the White House, has been one of America's most effective financial aid programs, but its value has been eroded over time. Pell Grant recipients are more than 60% of the borrower population. The Department of Education estimates that roughly 27 million borrowers will be eligible to receive up to $20,000 in relief. All right, let's go through the plan here that the Biden administration has released. They say $20,000 if you went to college on Pell Grants, $10,000 if you didn't receive Pell Grants. Forgiveness only applies to those earning less than $125,000, and student loan pause extended one final time, they say, through December 31st, 2022. And of course, the payment will be based on income. And again, nearly 90% of debt cancellation benefits will go to borrowers earning less than $75,000. You can see some of those stats there on your screen. We do know that for undergraduate loans, those will be cut in half in the amount that borrowers have to pay each month, from 10% to 5% of discretionary income. This plan will raise the amount of income that is considered non-discretionary income and is protected from repayments. And you may not be able to see, let's see, can we pull down the graphic here so we can take a full look at this list here? So the reforms would simplify loan repayment and deliver significant savings to low and middle income borrowers. So let's say a typical single construction worker making $38,000 a year with a construction management credential. Let's say they lower that payment $31 a month compared to $147 they pay now. That would mean their annual savings would be $1,400. All right, so that is the very latest of what I wanted to share with you. I think Ryan Pierce is standing by. He has a good handle on all things politics, so we definitely rely on him for anything happening in Washington, D.C. So, Ryan, let me unmute your mic for you. And what do you have for us today ahead of this pretty big announcement?
Sure. No, Victoria, thank you. Just a couple quick notes. I think maybe if you're a viewer, you might be wondering, how many people in America actually support this policy? Is this something that voters really want? There's not a ton of polling on, at least recent polling, on this particular issue. So much of the focus has been shifted to the midterm elections, talking about candidates and President Biden's approval rating overall. According to an NPR Ipsos poll, a very well-respected polling program, 55% of Americans support student loan debt cancellation up to $10,000, and about 45% don't support this particular move from the president. So it looks like, in terms of how many Americans support it, how many don't, this seems to be at least a somewhat popular move. The majority does support this type of legislation, or type of move, I guess I should say. It's not legislation from the president. But when you go up to $50,000 in terms of student loan debt forgiveness, which is what a lot of Democrats were hoping for, this NPR Ipsos poll says only 41% of Americans would support that type of move from the president. So clearly, the president has at least some idea on what the polling says. It looks like a slight majority of Americans do favor this type of student loan debt cancellation, about 55%. But if you start going up, that number of Americans who favor it drops off pretty significantly. And one American who doesn't favor this decision from the president is House GOP leader Kevin McCarthy. I'm just going to read you his tweet, because I actually do think looking at social media, looking at how Republicans are responding to this does sum up to an extent a lot of their viewpoints. He says, "Who will be forced to pay for Biden's debt transfer scam? Hardworking Americans who already paid off their debts or never took student loan debt in the first place." So he answers his own question there. That is House GOP Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. And that tweet probably sums up what a lot of Republicans, a lot of maybe conservative people are thinking, is that, look, we didn't have student loans, we didn't have debt, we didn't take that on. How come we're going to pay this off in taxes for the Americans who do have to take on this, who chose to take on this student loan debt? But Democrats come back and say, look, this is a moderate compromise. A lot of young Americans, especially millennials and maybe older Gen Z Americans, a lot of Democrats argue to an extent they were duped into this system of taking on federal loans, and they believe it is a responsibility of the federal government to pay them off. That is a Democrat perspective, but as you see right here, Kevin McCarthy and a lot of Republicans are saying, look, Americans took on these loans. They took the chance by going to college. And why are other Americans, even if it's only $10,000, not $50,000, like many Democrats were hoping for, having to pay off their student loan debt? Obviously, as you see another Congress member mentioning or tweeting here, obviously it's much more complicated than just taxpayers paying off other graduate student loans and people who are still having to pay those off. There's so much more to this type of legislation and discussion, and politicians will of course try to simplify things and tailor them to their base like they always will. But you see what Republicans are saying in response to President Biden getting set to make this big decision. We do have a podium up. He's getting set to speak. And again, we've talked about it, Victoria. This is one of President Biden's, or was one of his biggest campaign promises. And the younger voters, by and large, were the ones who really supported the president and got him into office. So I would think, and I think most people who follow politics feel, that this is the president fulfilling at least part of a promise to some of his voters. But at the same time, like we've talked about, a lot of more progressive Democrats were hoping for cancellation entirely, or at least $50,000 in student loan debt canceled. The Biden administration has looked at the polling, it seems like, and realized, okay, Americans are willing to support up to $10,000, but a vast majority, 59%, do not support that 50,000 thought that was swirling around Democratic circles earlier this year.
Thank you so much for that, Ryan. And it is important to know all perspectives. And we do know, as you had mentioned, that there are people on the right and the left that aren't happy with this decision. Some say it's too much. Some say it's not enough. So speaking of the opposition, I did want to share with you another tweet that we were able to find here from McConnell. Let's go ahead and pop this up. He tweeted out a full statement saying Democrats' student loan socialism is a slap in the face to working Americans who sacrificed to pay their debt or made different career choices to avoid debt. a wildly unfair redistribution of wealth toward higher earning people. And again, you can go to his Twitter page if you want to read his full statement that you have snipped there. And also, as Ryan had mentioned, a new development here is we do see a podium shot. That means that we're not too far off from hearing the president speak. So while we're waiting on hearing from him, let's go over some of these details of the plan again. All right, so part of the plan is to provide targeted debt relief to address the financial harms of the pandemic. It makes the student loan system more manageable for current and future borrowers. Again, this is according to the Biden administration. They will, let's pull that graphic down if we can. It'll provide relief for up to 43 million borrowers, relief dollars targeted to low and middle income borrowers, help borrowers of all ages, and help address wealth disparities. And we do have a statement from the White House that we're going to share with you here while we're waiting on the president. And it looks like we do have the president walking up to the podium. Let's go ahead and take a listen in.
When America made 12 years of public education universal in the last century, we became, not figuratively, literally, the best educated public in the world, and better prepared than any other nation. And I would argue that it's one of the reasons why we were so successful and have been so successful. But as you've all observed, other nations have caught up. In the 21st century, in my view, I think the vast majority of the Americans, 12 years of universal education is not enough. And that we're going to be outcompeted by the rest of the world if we don't take action. But here's the deal. The cost of education beyond high school has gone up significantly. The total cost to attend a public four-year university has tripled, nearly tripled in 40 years. Tripled. Instead of properly funding public colleges, many states have cut back their support. We're just talking about that in the Oval. Many states have cut back support for their state universities, leaving students to pick up more of the tab. And for 50 years, Pell Grants had been a key way for the federal government to help lower-income families, particularly those earning less than $60,000 a year, to send their kids to college. Those Pell Grants used to cover 80% of the cost of going to a public four-year college. Today, Pell Grants cover roughly 32%. That's 1/3 of the cost as opposed to before. It matters. I remember walking up, now my dad, like probably a lot of your folks, cared a lot about your education. My dad's greatest regret was that he never got to go to college. And my dad was a very well-read man, particularly history, but it was a great regret. And you always say, Joey, you're going to be a college man. And I'd say, Dad, but what does that matter? I mean, you can still get fired if you're a college man. He said, yeah, but they can never take it away from you. They can never take your education away. And I remember my senior year, I got into one of the little Ivies, and I got into a number of schools, and we're trying to get the money, even with financial assistance, to be able to go there. We had 4 kids, all of us wanting to go to school. And I remember going down after a baseball game. I went to a really good school up in Claymont, Delaware, on the Pennsylvania border, and drove down to Newark, Delaware, where my dad worked at an automobile agency. And I walked in, and I had my spikes, and because the reason I was going down, when your dad works at an automobile agency, the great advantage, you get a new car to go to the prom, or a good used car off the lot. You think I'm joking? I'm not joking. And so I went down to my 51 Plymouth with beach towels for seat covers, and I had my uniform on, my spikes off. I ran in, and the woman's name was Mary, who ran the place. I said, Mary, where's Dad? She said, he's out in the lane going into the repair shop. Give him my word, true story. And my dad was a well-dressed, refined fella, and I walked out, and my dad was pacing back and forth between the big garage door going into the repair shop and the door going out of the showroom. And he looked up, he said, oh, Joey, honey, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I thought, God, something happened. This is before cell phones. So something happened to one of my brothers or my sister or my mom or something. I said, what's the matter, Dad? He He said, I went to see, the guy's name was Charlie Delcher, who was a vice president of the Farmers Bank, which was a state-owned bank that did a lot of the financing of people wanting to purchase a car. He said, I went to Charlie and asked to borrow the money. He said, he won't lend it to me. He said, I'm so ashamed. I'm so damn ashamed. You know, my dad would, my dad was like millions of parents all across the country. Want to help the kids to get to school, but there was just no way to be able to do it. And because he believed, as I do, that education is a ticket to a better life. It's something Jill and I, Kamala and Doug, we understand deeply. I'm sure the vast majority of you do as well. But over time, that ticket has become too expensive for too many Americans. All this means is an entire generation is now saddled with unsustainable debt in exchange for an attempt, at least, at a college degree. The burden is so heavy that even if you graduate, you may not have access to the middle-class life that the college degree once provided. Many people can't qualify for a mortgage to buy a home because of the debt they continue to carry. They carry, it's too high. They can't come up with the down payment anyway. A lot of folks are even putting off starting families because of the cost. And the dream of starting your own business is just way off in the distance with the debt that so many are saddled with. Many of you had to leave school because the financial strain was much too high. About a third of the borrowers have debt but no degree, and worst of both worlds, debt and no degree. The burden is especially heavy on Black and Hispanic borrowers, who on average have less family wealth to pay for it. They don't own their homes to borrow against to be able to pay for college. And the pandemic only made things worse. But we responded aggressively to the pandemic to minimize the economic impact of the harm of COVID imposed on individuals, families, and businesses. You all were there. It was recovery. Look, we increased unemployment benefits for workers who were laid off. We provided loans to small businesses so they could stay afloat and take care of their families and their employees. We provided assistance to people to put food on the table. Remember those long lines you guys would all film of cars? Decent looking cars, not jalopies, nice cars. Just waiting for a box of food to be put in the trunk in the United States of America? Waiting for over an hour to get food in a trunk? And we provided rent and mortgage assistance to keep people from being evicted and thrown out in the street. Our approach to help Americans who need it the most was necessary, and it was the right thing to do, and it helped people avoid financial crisis, which helped our whole country as a consequence of that. That didn't benefit them, it benefited the whole economy. Our approach is why America's economic recovery was faster and stronger than any other advanced nation in the world. Now it's time to address the burden of student debt in the same way. Working closely with the Secretary of Education, he's got the hard job, Secretary Cardona. Here's what my administration is going to do to provide more breathing room for people so they have less burdened by student debt. And quite frankly, to fix the system itself, which when we came in, we both acknowledged was broken in terms of, anyway. There are three key factors what we're going to do today. First, we've made incredible progress advancing America's economic recovery. We've wound down pandemic relief programs like the ones on unemployment insurance and small businesses. It's time we do the same thing for student loans. Student loan payments pause is going to end. It's going to end December 30. I'm extending to December 31st, 2022, and it's going to end at that time. It's time for the payments to resume. Second, my campaign for president, I made a commitment. That would provide student debt relief, and I'm honoring that commitment today. Using the authority Congress granted the Department of Education, we will forgive $10,000 in outstanding federal student loans. In addition, students who come from low-income families, which allowed them to qualify to receive a Pell Grant, will have their debt reduced $20,000. Both of these targeted actions are for families who need it the most, working and middle-class people hit especially hard during the pandemic, making under $125,000 a year. If you make more than that, you don't qualify. No high-income individual or high-income household on top of the 5%, in the top 5% of incomes, by the way, will benefit from this action, period. In fact, about 90% of the eligible beneficiaries make under $75,000 as family. Here's what that means. If you make under $125,000, you get $10,000 knocked off your student debt. If you make under $125,000 a year and you received a Pell Grant, you'll get an additional $10,000 knocked off that total, for a total of $20,000 relief. 95% of the borrowers can benefit from these actions. That's 43 million people. Of the 43 million, over 60% are Pell Grant recipients. That's 27 million people who will get $20,000 in debt relief. Nearly 45% can have their student debt fully canceled. That's 20 million people who can start getting on with their lives. All this means people can finally crawl out from under that mountain of debt, to get on top of their rent and their utilities, to finally think about buying a home or starting a family or starting a business. And by the way, when this happens, the whole economy is better off. In the coming weeks, the Department of Education will lay out in detail a short and simple form to apply for this relief, along with information when this application process opens. By resuming student loan payments at the same time as we provide targeted relief, we're taking an economically responsible course. As a consequence, about $50 billion a year will start coming back into the Treasury because of resumption of debt. Independent experts agree that these actions taken together will provide real benefits for families without meaningful effect on inflation. Let's be clear. I hear it all the time. How do we pay for it? We pay for it by what we've done. Last year, we cut the deficit by more than $350 billion. This year, we're on track to cut it by more than $1.7 trillion by the end of this fiscal year, the single largest deficit reduction in a single year in the history of America. And the Inflation Reduction Act is going to cut it by another $300 billion over the next decade, because Medicare will be paying less for prescription drugs, and over $1 trillion if you add it out for the next 2 decades. The point is this: there is plenty of deficit reduction to pay for the programs, cumulative deficit reduction to pay for the programs many times over. I will never apologize for helping Americans, working Americans and middle class, especially not to the same folks who voted for a $2 trillion tax cut that mainly benefited the wealthiest Americans and the biggest corporations, that slowed the economy, didn't do a hell of a lot for economic growth, and wasn't paid for, and racked up this enormous deficit. Just as we've never apologized when the federal government forgave almost every single cent of over $700 billion in loans to hundreds of thousands of small businesses across America during the pandemic. No one complained that those loans caused inflation. A lot of these folks in small businesses are working in middle-class families. They needed help. It was the right thing to do. So the outrage over helping working people with student loans, I think, is just simply wrong, dead wrong. Third thing, we're fixing the student loan program system itself. We've talked about this at length. This is really important. We're proposing to make what's called an income-driven repayment plan simple and fair. And here's how. No one with an undergraduate loan today or in the future, whether for community college or a four-year college, will have to pay more than 5% of their discretionary income to repay their loan. That's income after you pay the necessities like housing, food, and the like. You currently pay 10%. We're cutting that in half to 5%. And after you pay your loan for 20 years, your obligation will be fulfilled if it hadn't already been fulfilled, meaning you won't have to pay any more, period. And borrowers whose original balance was less than $12,000, many of whom are community college students, will be done paying just after 10 years. These changes will save more than $1,000 a year on average for the borrower. It's a game changer. We're also fixing what's called, and this has been the bane of driving me crazy when I was out of office, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Now, this program forgives student loans to encourage those students who have those loans if they go into public service. Think of the millions who are public school teachers, local police officers, workers at local charities, members of the military and the National Guard, and so many more. Think of the folks who work for federal, state, local, tribal governments, keeping essential services going, responding to natural disasters, all those firefighters and cops. The program is designed so that if you serve in one of these jobs, and we'll be able to list those and you'll be able to accurately assess whether you do, and make your loan payments for 10 years, even if it's not consecutive years, your remaining balance will be completely forgiven. It's a great idea, but the program's a mess. It's so inefficient and complicated, too many people just give up. Think if a service member defers their student loan payment while they're deployed. The system is so restrictive that their active duty service didn't count as public service, and the loan isn't forgiven as promised. It's outrageous. Well, the man to my left is going to fix it. The Department of Education has recently proposed changes that will make this program work better and over the long term, much better. And now the department issues emergency temporary changes to retroactively credit public service so it counts and loans are forgiven. Since I've been in office, more than 175,000 teachers, nurses, police officers have been able to get over $10 billion in loan forgiveness so far through this program. But this opportunity expires on October 31st, 2022. So my message to all servants, all public servants, all those who are the ones that are volunteering, is out with student debt to go. Here's what you want, if you're worried about how to do it, go to pslf.gov before October 31st to see if you qualify for public service student loan forgiveness. This is another game changer. And we're going to have people who are there to help get you, help direct you and work you through the process. And one more big change we're making to the system is we're holding colleges accountable for jacking up costs without delivering value to students. We've all heard of those schools luring students with a promise of big paychecks when they graduate, only to watch these students be ripped off and left with mountains of debt. And my predecessors looked the other way, for some reason, with good reason, to do anything about this fraud. My administration is taking it on. For example, the Department of Education works with private education associations to accredit colleges and universities so they can receive federal aid. Well, last week, the Department of Education fired a college accreditor that allowed colleges like ITT and Corinthian to defraud borrowers. And combined with our emergency actions, the Public Service Forgiveness Program and other actions we've taken, we've been able to cancel more than $32 billion in student debt for 1.6 million borrowers, including those defrauded by these bad acting schools. Our goal is to shine a light on the worst actors so students can avoid these debt traps. Now, I understand not everything I'm announcing today is going to make everybody happy. Something is too much. I find it interesting how some of my Republican friends who voted for those tax cuts and others think that we shouldn't be helping these folks. Something is too little, but I believe my plan is responsible and fair. It focuses the benefit on middle class and working families. It helps both current and future borrowers, and will fix a badly broken system. And these actions build on my administration's effort to make college more affordable in the first place. It includes unprecedented investments, nearly $6 billion in historic black colleges and universities, much of which is focused on pandemic relief to help students cover tuition, and other costs so they could stay in school. And I must be honest with you, I'm going to continue to fight for doubling the Pell Grants. I didn't get that done this time. Let me say it again. 12 years of universal education is not enough. I'm going to continue to work for universal pre-K for every 3- and 4-year-old, and universal community college for education beyond high school. Let me close with this. I ran for office to grow the economy from the bottom up and the middle out. Because when we do that, everybody does better. Everybody does well. The wealthy do very well, the poor have a way up, and the middle class can have breathing room. And that's going to help America win the economic competition of the 21st century, because much of my time is spent, how do we remain the most competitive nation in the world with the strongest economy in the world, with the greatest opportunities in the world? That's what today's announcement is about. It's about opportunity. It's about giving people a fair shot. It's about the one word America can be defined by, possibilities. It's all about providing possibilities. We're going to have a lot more to say about this. There's a lot of material that's going to be put out as to how this is being implemented. And I want to thank you all, and God bless you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Mr. President, how much advance notice did you have of the FBI's plan to search Mar-a-Lago?
I didn't have any advance notice. None. Zero. Not one single bit. Thank you.
Mr. President, is this unfair to people who paid their student loans or chose not to take out loans?
Is it fair to people who, in fact, do not own multi-billion-dollar businesses? They see why these guys give them all a tax break? Is that fair? What do you think?
What about people who paid their loans, though, struggled to pay their loans, and now others don't have to?
All right, that was President Biden talking about his new student loan forgiveness plan. We're going to pull down the audio there as that press conference has ended. And I do have Ryan Piers, my colleagues here at Local News Live, Ryan Piers and Alicia Myers standing by. Alicia will be speaking with a Gray DC Bureau correspondent in just a moment. But first, we're going to go to Ryan Piers, who has a brief recap of what we just heard from the president. Ryan, what do you have for us?
Yeah, I just want to provide a little bit of context around the discussion of college potentially becoming too expensive for young people or families to go to. I know David is going to come up with more of the breakdown of what President Biden just had to say and provide that national look. But U.S. World News in report.
All right, it appears we are having some issues with your microphone. Let's go ahead and get that worked out for you really quick, and then we can go back to Ryan Piers. Again, we just heard from President Biden over at the White House talking about his student loan forgiveness plan, and I think, do we have the audio resolved? Let's go ahead and give it a shot. All right, Ryan, what do you have for us?
Sure, thanks, Victoria. Yeah, we'll see. I think I got my mic working, but we'll give it a try here. So, U.S. News and World Report. David is going to break down more of the nitty-gritty of what Biden just said. But U.S. News and World Report, it's that program that analyzes how colleges are ranked. They rank colleges every year. You may have looked at it when you're helping your kid decide to go to college. They say that since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, 9%, there's been a 9% drop in the number of young people going to college, which shows that potentially it is just becoming too expensive for people to go to now as prices continue to rise at a much higher rate than inflation for college students. So it is something the president is trying to address, potentially looking at the environment for colleges, the fact that about 1.4 million less students are in college now than the beginning of 2020. It's part of the broader context in which Biden is making this decision.
All right, thank you so much for that context, Ryan. We are going to go now to my colleague here, co-host Alicia Myers. She will be ready in just a moment. She'll be speaking with our Gray DC Bureau reporter, David Aid, who was listening to that briefing as well. But while we're waiting on that to happen, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about the plan here from President Biden. He, of course, just announced the Biden-Harris administration student debt relief plan. Let's kind of dive into some of these details while we're waiting on David Aid over in Washington, D.C. So what does this program mean for you and what comes next? President Biden, Vice President Harris, and the U.S. Department of Education have announced a 3-part plan to help working and middle-class federal student loan borrowers transition back to regular payment as pandemic-related support expires. This plan includes loan forgiveness of up to $20,000. Many borrowers and families may be asking themselves, what do I have to do to claim this relief? Well, the White House has set up an entire page dedicated to giving some information about this student loan forgiveness plan. Let's go through some of this. So the Biden administration student loan debt relief plan has a few different parts to it. The first part, find that on studentaid.gov/debt relief announcement. That's where you can find more there. We are going to go now to our very own Alicia Myers, who's standing by. She is speaking with David Aid. He is a Grade DC nationwide correspondent, and he is standing by to give us a little bit more insight and context into this announcement. Alicia, what do you have for us?
All right, thank you, Victoria. As you mentioned, joined now with David Aid. He is in our DC bureau. David, listening into Biden today, what are some of the details you have for us, especially when it comes to, we've heard a lot of numbers of how many people. Who are those people? What borrowers qualify for this?
Yeah, there's a lot of numbers to keep track of here, but basically it comes down to if you make $125,000 or less as a single person, or $250,000 or less as a married couple. These are the people that qualify for some sort of potential forgiveness here. Then you get into whether you had a Pell Grant or not as you went to college. So if you didn't have a Pell Grant and you meet those income requirements, then we're talking about up to $10,000 in student loan forgiveness. If you did have a Pell Grant when you went to college, it's $20,000 in student loan forgiveness.
So what's the difference between a Pell Grant, those who are going to be getting possible $20,000, and just your regular grants, the $10,000?
Yeah, so the Pell Grant here is one of the keys that folks behind the scenes fought for to ensure that a lot of this forgiveness was going to people who needed it most, people from lower income families. So the Pell Grant is available for people when they went to college if their families made $60,000 or less. So if you had a Pell Grant, and you would know that you would have qualified for that during the time where you filled out your FAFSA as you went through college, if you received that from the federal government's financial aid, then you would qualify for that. If your family made more than $60,000 at the time when you went to college, you would not have qualified for a Pell Grant, and you would be then looking at a $10,000 in forgiveness here.
So this is, good news. A lot of people have been looking forward to this, including Biden. I know on the campaign trail, he talked many times about how he wanted to help do some relief for people. Let's show his tweet from earlier today. We have that where he was just announcing some of the changes that he was getting ready to make. Can you talk a little bit about what this means for Biden to be able to do something like this while in office?
Yeah, and even during the speech today, just a few moments ago, he shared a personal story of why this was an impactful decision for him. He also talked about, he made that campaign promise to help folks who are buried under student loan debt. He talked about today that this is about opportunity, giving people a fair shot, he said. And he even mentioned that he believes that some people are delaying things like buying a home, even having a family, because they are under so much burden of student loan debt. He feels that going this route may help them get out of that situation and be able to move forward with their lives. And he said, really, student loan debt has been a barrier to the middle class, to access to the middle class. And he says he thinks it's unfair that, you go to college, you should have access to join the middle class after you leave schooling. But he also talked about folks who went to school but didn't finish, had to leave because they couldn't continue on because of cost or because of other issues. So he said this is really the worst situation. A lot of people in this situation are going to benefit from this. People who went to some school, they took out loans to do so, but then didn't leave with a college degree, so don't have the opportunities that folks that do have college degrees have. So he says these are people who were indebted, but also don't have the degree to show for it. So he's hoping that this loan forgiveness will help those folks get out of a hole that he says that they're in.
Biden also mentioned when he was talking to the nation today that he says this plan is going to provide a huge economic impact in a good way for families of all types. He says it's really going to help everyone be able to kind of move forward in life. Is everyone in the